Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own family? Like, the people who once cheered you on suddenly stopped seeing you at all? Nicole Jennings was once the pride of her parents, a brilliant young engineer with dreams to change the world. But one day, without warning, they gave her childhood bedroom to her younger brother so he could have a gaming studio. Nicole, she was told to sleep on the basement floor just until she figured life out. But what they didn't know was she was already planning something. Would you stay quiet? Would you fight back? Or would you rebuild your worth right in front of them and make sure they never forget what they lost? This is not just a story of betrayal, it's a story of dignity, quiet, revenge, and the power of walking away without ever slamming the door. I never imagined I'd be banished to the basement of my childhood home like an unwanted tenant, but that's exactly what happened, because my brother needed my room for his gaming setup. It wasn't a conversation, it wasn't even a warning. I came home from a walk one afternoon, and my room, the one I'd grown up in, the one that still had a shelf lined with trophies and science fair ribbons, was already half cleared out. Tyler's voice carried from behind the door. "Dude, the lighting is so much better in here," he said to one of his friends on a headset. "Yeah, I've got room now for the triple monitor rig." My parents finally kicked my sister to the basement. Took long enough. I just stood there, one hand still on the stair railing. My mom saw me first. She stepped out from the kitchen, still wiping her hands on a dish towel, and smiled like this was all perfectly reasonable. "We figured it'd be a better use of space," she said casually. "You're barely here anyway." I blinked. "I live here," I said. "At least I thought I did." "Well, it's just temporary," she replied, brushing me off like I was overreacting. "Tyler needs space for his college prep projects and, well, gaming's important to him. My father didn't even come out of the den. He just shouted from his recliner, 'We put your stuff downstairs, the basement's not so bad, you'll manage.' And that was that I hadn't moved back home because I wanted to. My startup folded after the post-pandemic economic crash left us hemorrhaging clients. I went from co-founding a sustainable tech company in Portland to couch surfing friends' apartments while applying for jobs every day with zero traction. Eventually, I swallowed my pride and called my parents in Tacoma. Just for a few months, I told them, until I get back on my feet. They welcomed me home at first. My mom made chicken pot pie that night. My dad asked about my company. Tyler barely looked up from his phone, but I told myself that was just how teenage brothers were. That first week I slept in my old bed and tried to believe this was a safe landing place, but it didn't last. Tyler was 19, loud, and constantly bringing over friends who treated the house like their dorm. Within a month I started hearing passive-aggressive comments. "You know, my mom said one morning, Tyler's got real momentum right now. All these competitions, sponsors. He could go pro. He needs a place to focus." "And I don't?" I asked, motioning to the laptop I'd been hunched over since sunrise. She didn't answer. Now the basement was my room. It smelled faintly of mildew. There were no windows, just one naked bulb in the ceiling. The furnace rattled life every 20 minutes, and the water pipes groaned every time someone flushed a toilet upstairs. My twin mattress, dragged from storage, was wedged between the washing machine and a stack of holiday decorations. There was no privacy, no heat, no acknowledgement, and yet they still expected me to be grateful. That night, curled up beneath a thin fleece blanket, while the sound of Tyler's laughter echoed through the floorboards above me, I stared at the cracked concrete ceiling and thought, they don't see me anymore, but I see everything now, and they won't see this coming. Before all of this, I was the pride of my family. Nicole Jennings, straight-A student, graduated magna cum laude from the University of Oregon with a degree in environmental engineering. I co-founded a sustainable water filtration startup at 24. We got seed funding. We were in talks with nonprofits in California and India. My parents used to brag about me to everyone. "She's going to change the world," my mom once told the cashier at Trader Joe's. beaming, and I believed her. But then the world changed faster than we could. The pandemic knocked out our overseas partners. Local contracts dried up. By the time the market began to stabilize, our finances had already crumbled. I laid off my 2 interns. Then my co-founder. I held on until the very last week, pouring in my savings just to keep the lights on. When the last investor pulled out, I packed my car, called my parents, and drove the 6 hours from Portland to Tacoma, with my dignity barely intact. That first night back, I sat at the kitchen table and showed my mom my portfolio project designs, published research, sustainability metrics I'd helped develop. She listened for a few minutes, then said, "Well, at least you have something to show for it." I swallowed the sting. It was supposed to be temporary, just long enough to regroup, apply for positions, maybe pivot toward consulting. I'd wake up early every day, submit job applications, write cover letters and research companies. I volunteered remotely for an environmental nonprofit to stay active in the field. I even picked up around the house without being asked, just to help. I vacuumed, cleaned out the fridge, organized the garage, cooked dinner 3 nights a week. Nobody noticed. One night, after making chicken marsala from scratch, I overheard my mom on the phone with her sister. "She's figuring things out," she said vaguely. "It's tough, but Tyler's really thriving lately. He's so focused, it's amazing." Tyler, my brother, had barely graduated high school, but my parents treated him like a Silicon Valley prodigy because he had a Twitch stream and a potential gaming sponsorship. His room was packed with LED lights and gear I didn't even know existed. They called it his creative space. Meanwhile, I slept beside a dehumidifier. When I asked my mom why she thought it was okay to give away my room, she shrugged. "You're not using it. And Tyler's at such a critical age. He needs support." "So did I said quietly. "When I lost everything, I needed support too." She just looked at me like she didn't understand what I meant. My dad, Frank, was even more dismissive. "You're resilient, Nicole. You'll bounce back. You always do." As if being strong made it okay to be invisible. The basement was cold. Every morning I'd roll up my makeshift bedding before anyone came downstairs. God forbid I leave evidence that someone was living down there. I kept my toiletries in a little plastic caddy under the sink. My clothes lived in cardboard boxes that grew soggier and more crumpled by the week. Tyler never said thank you when I cooked dinner. He left dishes everywhere. Sometimes he had his friends over, and they'd play until 2 a.m., stomping over the basement floor like I wasn't even there. Once, when I asked if they could keep it down, Tyler said, "It's just for a few hours, Nicole. You're being dramatic." Right, dramatic. The most I ever asked for was quiet, and maybe a door that locked. What hurt most wasn't the basement or the cold or the lack of privacy. It was how quickly I became irrelevant. The same parents who used to show off my science medals now forgot to ask how my day was. The same brother who used to beg for my help on math homework now barely made eye contact. One day I tried to share a small win, an email response from a green tech firm in Seattle. Not even an interview, just a kind reply. "That's great," my mom said, not even looking up from her phone. "By the way, Tyler's tournament is this weekend. Can you make sure we have snacks and extra ice?" I nodded. I always nodded, because what else was I going to do? Start a fight over something I'd already lost. At night I would lie awake, listening to the water heater creak and hum. I'd close my eyes and pretend I was back in my Portland office, brainstorming ideas with my team, planning field tests, mapping impact metrics. And then I'd open my eyes and remember where I really seasoned was wrapped in a scratchy blanket on a concrete floor, forgotten by the very people who were supposed to be my safety net. I kept telling myself it wasn't personal, it was just temporary. But deep down, I knew better. Somehow, in the space of a few months, I'd gone from the daughter they bragged about to the burden they didn't know how to handle. And no one, even me, seemed sure how I'd disappeared. The moment that broke me wasn't loud. It wasn't some screaming match or a door slamming. It was a whisper. "Tyler's friends are coming over tonight," Mom said one Tuesday morning, sipping her coffee. "Can you vacuum the basement before they get Here I blinked at her. The basement, yes. You've got your things down there and they'll probably be hanging out in the living room, so it needs to look tidy. My things, as if my sleeping bag and box of toiletries were just clutter. As if I wasn't living down there, just leaving my mess around like a careless guest. I said nothing, just nodded and grabbed the vacuum. Later that day, I stood in my corner of the basement, pushing the old Hoover back and forth between the washing machine and the drafty concrete wall and felt something inside me grind into place. This wasn't just temporary, this was how they saw me now. That night I stayed down there while Tyler and his friends watched movies upstairs and screamed over video games. At one point I came up to grab water and they looked at me like I was some weird aunt who'd wandered into the party. "Oh hey Nick," one of them said with a smirk. "It's Nicole," I said already, turning away. Tyler didn't look up, he just said, "That's our live-in boomer, don't mind her." Laughter loud sharp and I felt every inch of my spine go cold. It wasn't the nickname, it was the fact that my brother, the one I used to drive to school, the one I helped with SAT prep, didn't correct himself. I wasn't a sister anymore. I was a joke in my own house. Later that week I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. I'd gone upstairs to grab laundry detergent from the hallway cabinet. The bathroom door was slightly open. Inside, my parents were brushing their teeth, talking between mouthfuls of foam like they always did. "She really needs to get her life in order," Mom mumbled. "She's trying," Dad replied, barely convincing. "It's just not moving fast. It's been months," Mom whispered, "and we're still paying for her on the insurance plan. She's not a dependent anymore." "Frank, I know, and Tyler's applying for private schools. That coverage matters. We need to prioritize." I didn't say anything. I just stood there in the hallway, detergent in hand, heart thudding so hard I could barely breathe. They were debating whether or not to cut me from health insurance without a job, without income, in the middle of a recession. Not once did they mention asking how I was doing, what I needed, just what I cost. That night, I lay awake on the basement floor and stared at the ceiling for hours. I thought about every extra shift I took in college so I could send money home when Dad's company downsized. I thought about the time I drove 6 hours during finals week to bring Tyler his backpack when he forgot it on a school trip. I thought about the startup I built with love and sacrifice, how they used to tell their friends Nicole's going to change things. And now I was someone to be managed. A liability, a bill. The next morning I was heating up oatmeal in the kitchen when Mom came in. "Can you keep your things in a basket or something?" she asked. Gesturing to my toothbrush and razor by the sink. "Tyler needs more counter space. He's getting really into skincare now." I laughed. I couldn't help it. Not because it was funny, because it was surreal. I was being erased. That day I bought a $3 plastic caddy at the dollar store and carried it up and down the stairs like I was living in a college dorm again, except back then I actually had a room. As the weeks dragged on, the requests became commands. "Nicole, you forgot to mop the entryway." "Nicole, can you move your laundry faster?" "Tyler's got a stream in 30. "Nicole, don't use the upstairs shower anymore. The water pressure throws off the balance." I said nothing. I nodded. I did what they asked, not because I agreed, but because I was watching, learning, letting the fire build. The final straw came during a family barbecue in the backyard. It was my uncle's birthday and relatives from Spokane and Eugene had come over. I stayed quiet most of the family evening, helping with burgers, cleaning dishes, setting out lemonade. At one point, my cousin Allie turned to my dad and said, "So, what's Nicole up to these days?" He hesitated. "She's in between things right now." "Oh, she's staying with us for a bit. But Tyler's doing incredible. He just got shortlisted for a scholarship with Twitch." Allie nodded politely. I excused myself, walked into the house and shut the basement door behind me. I sat on the mattress, tears in my eyes, not just because I'd been reduced to an afterthought, but because no one else seemed to care. I didn't matter. Not enough to ask, not enough to defend, not even enough to mention. And in that silence, a decision crystallized. They want me quiet. Fine, I'll be So quiet they won't even hear me build my way out. But when I'm done, they'll see me, and they'll never forget it. The flu hit me hard. It started with aches in my lower back, then a sore throat, then the fever. I spent 2 days curled up on the basement floor, too exhausted to stand the concrete pressing into my bones no matter how many blankets I layered. Underneath me, I coughed so hard I pulled a muscle in my side. No one checked on me. Not once. I heard them upstairs moving around like everything was normal. I could smell bacon one morning, hear the blender whirring another afternoon. Tyler's voice echoed through the floorboards, laughing, shouting, winning something online. At one point, I dragged myself up the stairs, dizzy and shivering, hoping for tea or a gesture of concern. My mom was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low but clear. "She's just kind of there," she said. "Not really part of anything anymore. It's like having a long-term guest who won't commit to moving out." I stopped cold. That sentence didn't just sting. It hollowed something out in me. I turned around and went back down to the basement without saying a word. That night, as I lay under a damp blanket watching shadows shift across the wall, I felt it fully, what it meant to be invisible, not rejected, not yelled at. Just unseen, like I was furniture, or clutter, a background object in the story of my family's life. When I was little, I used to hide in this same basement. When I got overwhelmed, I'd sit behind the water heater with a flashlight and read chapter books until my mom called me for dinner. It had felt like a sanctuary then. Now it was a holding cell, one I was expected to decorate with gratitude. 2 weeks later, the Jennings family hosted a birthday dinner for my grandmother extended. Family filled the living room, the dining table, the patio. The whole house buzzed with laughter and chatter. I helped set up. Of course, cut the cheese plate, lit the candles, made everyone's tea just how they liked it. I wore the only wrinkle-free shirt I had left and tried to smile midway through the evening. My cousin Rachel asked my mom, "Nicole, you must be working on something exciting, right?" Before I could speak, Mom stepped in. "Tyler's been doing amazing lately," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "He's really focusing on college admissions and has some great scholarship opportunities lined up." Tyler grinned and said something about esports and leadership workshops, and me, I disappeared again. Nobody asked a follow-up. No one noticed that I hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. I was there holding the tray of hors d'oeuvre, but not present in anyone's mind, like a server at a party I wasn't invited to. When it was time for group photos, they lined up in the backyard, laughing and arranging chairs. My aunt waved me over. "Nicole, sweetie, can you take the picture?" I smiled and took the phone. Click, a perfect portrait, with me behind the camera. Later, I wandered out to the edge of the yard. While everyone laughed over old stories inside, I stood beneath the pine tree that used to be my hiding spot as a kid and looked toward the neighbor's house, a small blue Craftsman that had been empty for months. Its windows were dark paint, peeling lawn half dead, but it had potential. More potential, I thought, than anything I had been given lately. That night, I rolled out my sleeping bag with slow, aching movements. The fever was gone, but the weight in my chest remained. Not illness, not even sadness, exactly. Just the quiet, brutal certainty that nothing was going to change unless I changed it. No one was coming to save me. Not my parents, not Tyler, not some job offer in a golden envelope I had. Tried being patient. I had tried being polite. All it had done was teach them how little they had to give me. I stared at the basement ceiling for hours that night, letting one thought play on repeat in my mind like a drumbeat. They want to pretend I'm not here. Fine. But I'll make sure they never forget where I was. The email came at 7:42 a.m. On a Friday, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a lukewarm mug of instant coffee, my laptop open, as usual, scanning job boards and rejection letters. I almost didn't check my inbox. Just muscle memory from weeks of disappointment. But there it was: subject reapplication, sustainability analyst position, Evergreen Energy Systems. I clicked without breathing. "Hi Nicole, Thank you for your application and impressive portfolio. We'd love to schedule a virtual interview with you next week to discuss your experience in sustainable filtration design. Looking forward to connecting. Danielle Cho, Talent Manager, Evergreen Energy Systems, Seattle, WA. I read it 3 times before I let myself feel anything. Then I exhaled. Not excitement, not yet, just clarity. This wasn't the offer, but it was movement. A door cracking open, and I was done waiting for anyone else to walk me through it. I closed the email and shut my laptop before Tyler wandered in. Barely grunted a morning, already immersed in his phone. I stood up to refill my coffee and said nothing about the news. No one needed to know. This was mine. I went back down to the basement, not with the same heaviness I usually carried, but with a strange stillness. I pulled out a notebook from under my mattress, one I hadn't touched in months, and started to write week 1 escape plan. Over the next several days I operated in silence. I still cooked dinner. I still vacuumed. Still nodded at requests like, "Can you pick up paper towels?" Or "Tyler needs the good chair tonight." But now behind every nod I was building something they couldn't see. I prepped obsessively for the interview, reread my old research papers. Rebuilt my design portfolio using free 3D rendering software. I downloaded mock interview questions and recorded myself answering them in the bathroom mirror. Every morning from 6 to 8 I worked. Every night after dinner when the dews from meiner Eitzlosh. House was loud, and no one noticed. My absence I walked to the local library and studied certifications, carbon reporting, water reclamation, environmental auditing. No one asked where I was going. No one noticed I wasn't around. I passed the interview. Then the second round. Then the final panel. 3 weeks later, Evergreen Energy offered me a full-time position in their Seattle office. $82,000 per year. Full benefits, relocation assistance, and an opportunity to help lead a pilot project on community-based water systems. I stared at the offer letter in my inbox for 10 minutes. Then I smiled. Not because I could finally leave, but because I didn't have to just leave. I could choose how. That night I sat out on the back porch with a glass of water and looked across the street at the little blue Craftsman. The house had been empty for over 8 months. Bank-owned, the lawn was a mess, the porch was caving, and a bright orange "for sale" sign leaned against the cracked fence. It wasn't glamorous, but I saw what it could be. A solar-paneled roof, a gray water filtration system, a green retrofit done by hand with intention. A home designed for independence, efficiency, healing. A place that said, "I made this, I deserve this." The next day I called the real estate agent. Her name was Michelle. She was chipper helpful and seemed more than a little surprised when I asked to view the property immediately. "You're sure you'll—" "I want this neighborhood," she asked. "I have some newer builds, closer to the lake." "No," I said, "it has to be this street." We walked through the old house that same afternoon, peeling linoleum, broken cabinets, a hallway that smelled faintly of mothballs. But the bones were strong, the layout open, and the price had dropped twice. "Needs a lot of love," Michelle warned, jotting notes on her clipboard. "I have it," I said simply. She blinked at me. 2 days later with the offer from Evergreen. As proof of employment and a modest inheritance from my grandmother that my parents didn't know I had, I submitted a mortgage application. It was approved in under a week. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not even Tyler. While they were busy planning his trip to a regional gaming event, I was finalizing floor plans for a full-scale eco-retrofit. I made calls to contractors during lunch breaks at the library. I sketched renovation ideas by flashlight under the frieze. Basement stairs. I even filed paperwork to register a new LLC in Washington State. Jennings Studio Lab focused sustainable residential design and consulting. All of it happened right under their noses. They never asked where I was going during the day. They didn't ask why. I smiled more. Why I started folding my clothes a little more carefully. boxing up my books. I was a shadow in their lives, and that gave me all the cover I needed. The house was officially mine by the second Friday of September. I signed the closing papers at 9:00 a.m., walked out of the escrow office holding the keys, and sat in my car in stunned silence. The morning sun was warm on the dashboard, stared at the worn brass key in my hand and whispered aloud just once I'm home. It didn't matter that the drywall was cracked, or that the pipes moaned like ghosts when the water ran. It didn't matter that the floors sloped and the kitchen looked like it hadn't been updated since 1983. What mattered was that every square inch of it belonged to me, and nobody could take it away. By 11:00 a.m. I was walking through my new front door while my parents were still across the street eating leftovers. They had no idea, not even when I met with the renovation crew in the driveway 2 hours later. Raphael, my contractor, was kind and efficient. His team showed up early, worked clean, and didn't ask unnecessary questions. I gave him a 6-week plan. Install solar panels, rewire the electrical system, overhaul the kitchen and bathroom, refinish the hardwood floors, and prepare the garage for a future workshop. I told him one thing very clearly. Want to move in exactly the day this place is livable. No earlier, no later. He nodded like he understood the subtext. We started the next morning, and yes, the noise was loud. Saws buzzed, hammers rang, cement mixers churned from dawn to dusk. Across the street, my family's house shook with the vibrations. I caught Tyler watching from the window, more than once, mouth open, confused. On the third day of demolition, my mom came outside while I was unloading new kitchen fixtures from a delivery van. She squinted at me from the curb. "Nicole, what is all this renovation?" I said without looking up. "I bought the place." Her face twisted into a shape I'd never seen, somewhere between shock, offense, and panic. "You bought this house?" "Yes." "Why didn't you tell us?" I finally met her gaze. "You didn't ask." She opened her mouth to reply but couldn't seem to find the words. I carried the faucet box inside and closed the door behind me. I didn't owe her more than that. Over the next few weeks, I transformed every insult, every dismissal, every sleepless night on a basement floor into design decisions. The guest bedroom became an open studio space, with floor-to-ceiling windows. The kitchen got a matte black finish with brushed brass handles, minimalist quartz counters, and smart appliances. The bathroom, rainfall shower, heated floors, sage green tile I'd picked out years ago and never had a place to put. But the backyard, that was where the real statement would live. I stood at the fence that bordered my parents' property and mapped out a full-size patio with a plunge pool and garden wall. Not for revenge, for peace, for sunlight, for dignity. For every night I had laid stiff on the ground listening to them talk about me like I wasn't there, I hired a landscape designer. We picked low-maintenance native plants, built a rainwater harvesting system, and centered the design around a fire pit with circular seating. From their kitchen window, it would be impossible to ignore. And that was exactly the point. Move-in day came right on schedule. The 21st of October, I packed in silence. Just 2 suitcases and a few boxes. I didn't say goodbye. I left my sleeping bag rolled up in the closet, still musty from those basement months, on the kitchen counter. I left a note. "Thanks for the floor. I found better ground." They didn't see me leave, but they definitely saw me arrive. At 6:00 p.m., I pulled into the driveway across the street in my borrowed U-Haul. I carried every box myself. At 642, I unlocked my front door, turned on the porch light, and stepped inside as the official owner, designer, and resident of the house they'd once called too rundown to bother with. The next day, the patio install began. My mom stopped by that afternoon wearing a forced smile and carrying a tray of cookies. "Housewarming," she said, like she hadn't made me sleep next to a furnace for 5 months. I accepted the cookies. I didn't invite her in. She hovered awkwardly on The porch. We had no idea you were planning this, I know, I said. Why didn't you tell us you were working again? I looked at her calmly. Because you never asked. Her eyes flicked around the porch. She was looking for a crack, a flaw, something to hold on to. There's no need to be dramatic, Nicole. We were doing our best. I smiled, and so was I. She left after that. Dad tried a week later, offering to help paint the garage. I told him I had professionals for that. Tyler never came by at all. But I'd catch him staring every now and then from the upstairs window where my bed used to be. When the patio was finished, I invited people over, not family but friends, co-workers, former professors who had supported me through my career's collapse and rebirth. We drank wine under string lights and shared stories around the fire pit. Laughter echoed. Joy was tangible. Across the street, my parents' house sat dark and still. The porch light was off. I imagined them sitting by the window watching, wondering how they had missed all of this, how the girl they thought had failed had quietly fully risen. They hadn't failed to notice my success. They'd failed to see me. But now, they couldn't look away. The final touch came on. A crisp November morning, I installed a discreet brass plaque near the front gate. It read Jennings Studio Lab, Sustainable Living Designed with Purpose. I saw my mother walk past it later that week. She paused, she read it, she blinked, and then she kept walking. She never asked what it meant, but I knew she understood. Because now every time she pulled into her driveway, every time she stepped onto her porch, every time she made her morning coffee and looked out her kitchen, the window, she'd see it, she'd see me, and there'd be no mistaking what I'd built, with silence, with resolve, with dignity, and without needing anyone's permission. Winter came quietly that year. I spent the early mornings wrapped in a blanket by my front window, sipping tea and watching frost gather on the rose bushes I'd planted myself. The house had a calmness to it now. Soft, light, warm hardwood. Floors silence that didn't feel like exile but like peace. There were no slamming doors, no footsteps overhead, no one asking me to be smaller so someone else could feel bigger, just stillness and breath. My career with evergreen energy took off fast. By January, I was leading a regional project on residential water efficiency. My name was printed on reports. I was quoted in articles. Not that my parents noticed, they never mentioned it, even when the local paper ran a feature on the young environmental architect, revitalizing old homes for modern living. But their silence didn't sting anymore, it just didn't matter. Tyler sent a message once, just a single line on Instagram. "Your place looks amazing, I liked the message." That was it. He didn't follow up. I didn't expect him to. What surprised me, though, was Brooke. She was my cousin, 3 years younger, the one person in the family who'd always seemed to watch quietly from the sidelines. One Sunday morning, she showed up at my door with a coffee in hand and a backpack slung over her shoulder. "I just needed to see this place," she said. I let her in. We sat in the kitchen for 2 hours. She told me how she'd always admired me even when everyone else acted like I had disappeared. She told me how she'd started questioning the way our family defined success and respect and worthiness. "They treated you like a failure the second you needed help," she said. But all I saw was strength. I didn't cry, but I did feel something shift. That's what healing looks like. Sometimes less like fireworks, more like someone seeing you clearly. Maybe for the first time in years. My parents tried in their way. There were polite waves across the street. A card in my mailbox that read, "Happy birthday, love from Mom and Dad." A voicemail from my dad saying, "We miss you at Sunday dinners." But they never said sorry. Never really asked, what did we do? And maybe they never will. That's the thing about boundaries. Once you build them, you realize they're not walls meant to trap people out. They're fences with gates. And gates only open when both sides are willing to meet in the middle. I'm not keeping them out, I'm just not letting them in the same way, not until I know it's safe. One night I walked past my old house on the way back from a neighborhood event. Their lights were on, I could see them moving around the kitchen, Mom rinsing dishes, Dad scrolling through his tablet, Tyler leaning against the fridge. It looked so normal. And for the first time, I didn't feel left out. I didn't feel anything. Because that chapter wasn't mine anymore. Mine was across the street, glowing warm behind me, full of laughter and thoughtfulness and intention. A home built on purpose, on knowing who I was, on not waiting to be invited into someone else's idea of worth. Sometimes people ask me why I bought a house right next to my parents. Was it revenge, they ask? Half joking, I smile. No, I say. It was a reminder. A reminder of what? That you don't have to move far to move on. If you're still listening, maybe you've been the ghost in your own family too. Maybe you've been talked over, looked past, or asked to apologize just for taking up space. And if that's true, I want you to hear this. You are not a burden. You are not a background character. You don't have to earn basic respect. You don't have to sleep on a floor, literally, or emotionally, to be allowed to stay. You are worthy now, not when you get the job, not when you stop being inconvenient now. So build your space, even if it starts in silence, even if no one notices it first, even if it's right next door to the ones who never saw you. Build anyway.